People used to tell me I had the most beautiful life they'd ever seen up close. The kind of life that made them stop mid-sentence at dinner parties and say things like, "Sloan, honestly, how do you do it?" And I'd smile and say something modest about hard work and good timing. And I'd mean every word of it. Because I did work hard. I worked ungodly hard. I built Sloan Hargrove Developments from a singles house flip in Fort Worth when I was 28 and flat broke, leveraged to my eyeballs, on a $180,000 property with bad plumbing and a cracked foundation. By the time I was 35, my company was managing a luxury residential portfolio across the entire Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. Custom builds, high-end renovations, exclusive lease properties, with a team of 42 people who counted on me for their paychecks. What I did not build was my marriage. Or rather, I thought I was building it. I thought we were building it together. Gavin and I met at a charity event 6 years ago. The kind of event where developers and architects and city officials stand around in nice shoes and pretend to care about the canapes. He was handsome and sharp, and he asked good questions, instead of just talking about himself, which was rare enough that I noticed. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. I gave him the VP of Property Management position at my firm 18 months into our marriage. Not because he pressured me, but because he was genuinely capable and I wanted our lives to be integrated. Professionally, personally, all of it. I wanted a partner in the real sense of the word. What I didn't realize was that while I was building an empire, Gavin was quietly constructing an entirely different kind of life on the foundation I'd laid. Her name was Kylie. She joined our company as a junior leasing agent the previous spring. 24 years old, newly licensed, fresh out of Texas A&M, wearing heels she hadn't quite learned to walk in yet. Gavin was her direct supervisor. She was bright in the ambitious, slightly desperate way of someone who grew up without much and was determined to prove it didn't define her. I know this because I heard it later, in excruciating detail, replayed through a device I'd hidden inside my own car. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first sign I noticed was his phone. Gavin had always been careless with it, left it on the kitchen counter, on the bathroom vanity, tossed it face up on the coffee table without a second thought. Sometime around July, it disappeared into his pocket whenever I entered a room. The screen was perpetually face down on the dinner table. He started taking calls in the garage, standing between our cars in the dark, speaking in that low, careful voice people use when they're trying not to be heard. I asked once, casually, who it was. He said, "It was our contractor in Frisco with scheduling drama." I nodded and let it go. I was busy. I told myself I was too busy to be paranoid. Then came the late nights. 3, sometimes 4 times a week, Gavin would text around 4 in the afternoon. Something came up, big showing with a corporate client, don't wait up. I always told him it was fine. I'd heat up leftovers and sit at the kitchen island, reviewing acquisition spreadsheets until midnight, and I'd feel nothing except a low, dull pull of loneliness that I kept reframing as the natural cost of 2 driven professionals sharing a life. When he came home past 11 one evening and I walked over to hug him before he could step into the bathroom, I caught something, a perfume that was not mine. Too sweet, the kind that comes in a gift set at Ulta, not the Chanel I kept on my vanity. I asked about it. He blinked once, just once, then laughed and said it was probably from Kylie. They'd had a long walkthrough at a property, and she'd been standing right next to him for hours. Such a close space, he said. You know how scent transfers. I said sure, of course. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling until 2 in the morning. The thing about being the person who runs a company is that you become extremely good at spotting anomalies in data. I review financial statements the way other people skim the news. Automatically, almost involuntarily. So when I sat down on a Sunday afternoon to go through our personal Amex Platinum statement, the charge that stopped me cold wasn't even the largest one on the page. It was a $3,400 purchase at a home goods boutique in Austin. One of those high-end places that sells custom throw pillows and hand-poured candles and artisan cutting boards for people with more taste than sense. I had not been to Austin in 2 months. I had not purchased anything from that store, ever. I called Gavin into the kitchen and showed him the screen with a calm I didn't feel, and asked if he recognized the charge. He studied it for exactly 2 seconds longer than he should have before his face rearranged itself into something sheepish. He'd been surprising me, he said, decorating the lake house for my birthday. Had to drive down to Austin to find the specific table runner I'd pointed out in a magazine months ago. He pulled me into a hug and laughed into my hair about how terrible he was at keeping secrets. I hugged him back. My arms felt mechanical. Our lake house sat on 4 acres in Dripping Springs Hill Country, about 45 minutes west of Austin. A property I designed and built myself over 2 years using the proceeds from my best quarter ever. I had personally selected every piece of furniture, every fixture, every tile. The place was supposed to be our retreat, unoccupied except for the weekends we drove down together. I hadn't been there in 6 weeks because of a complicated acquisition deal I was closing in Plano. I assumed Gavin hadn't been there either. 3 days after the Amex conversation, while Gavin was at a client dinner, I drove to Dripping Springs alone. I told myself I was being irrational the entire 4-hour round trip. I told myself I was becoming one of those women, suspicious, sniffing around for evidence of crimes that probably didn't exist. I turned the radio up loud and drove through the hill country dark with the windows down, the August air thick and warm against my face. I used my key and pushed open the front door, and the smell hit me before anything else. Not the clean cedar and linen smell of a closed-up lake house, cooking smells, vanilla air freshener from a plug-in. The particular staleness of a space where someone has been living, really living, day after day. The couch cushions were out of place. There was a half-empty bottle of rosé on the kitchen counter, and 2 wine glasses in the drying rack that I had not left there. On the reclaimed wood coffee table, the one I'd custom-ordered from an artisan in Fredericksburg, sat a fashion magazine I didn't subscribe to and a phone charger with a rose gold case I'd never owned in my life. I walked up the stairs to the primary bedroom. I opened the door. My custom linen duvet, the one I'd brought back from a buying trip in Connecticut, had been replaced with a comforter in a bright, geometric print. Not replaced as in removed. Replaced as in thrown over it, layered on top, like someone had grabbed something cheap and cheerful because they liked the color. A woman's cardigan was draped over the chair in the corner. On the nightstand sat a half-eaten bag of gummy worms next to a lamp I did not recognize. I stood in the doorway for a very long time. I didn't touch anything. I didn't move a single object. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Every room, every surface, every item that didn't belong to me, with the steady, deliberate focus of someone who has spent years documenting property for legal purposes. Because that is exactly what this was. Documentation, evidence. I drove home. I said nothing. The following Monday, I called a contact I trusted at a local electronics security firm and paid him generously and in cash to install a GPS tracker and 2 voice-activated audio recording devices inside my white Range Rover. The car Gavin drove 4 or 5 days a week. The car that I owned outright and whose title appeared only on my personal balance sheet. The installation took 40 minutes in the parking garage beneath my office, while Gavin sat upstairs in a department meeting. That evening, he came home and made pasta and poured us both a glass of Cabernet and told me funny stories about an open house that had gone sideways. I laughed at the right moments. I refilled his glass. I was extraordinary. What came through those audio devices over the next 10 days dismantled every last corner of the story I'd been telling myself. The first recording I listened to was captured while I was supposedly asleep, and Gavin was taking a work call on the back porch. I sat in the bathroom with the door locked and earbuds in and listened to Kylie's voice. Pouty, restless, complaining that she was bored at the lake house and that the Wi-Fi kept cutting out, and why couldn't he just tell me he was going out of town so they could spend a whole weekend together without sneaking? Then Gavin's voice, low and warm and laced with an affection I hadn't heard directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. Babe, just be patient. Sloane's got a site visit on Thursday. I'll be there by noon. Then Kylie again. Can you bring the Range Rover? I love that car. And Gavin, without a pause, without even the decency of a hesitation. It's basically ours anyway. Basically ours. I pressed my back against the bathroom tile and breathed through my nose until the urge to put my fist through the mirror passed. Over the following days, I listened to him promise her dinners at restaurants I recognized from our own credit card statements. I watched the GPS dot confirm what the audio was already telling me. The Range Rover parked for hours at the Dripping Springs property. On days, Gavin claimed to be showing commercial units in Irving. I pulled every receipt from our shared accounts and cross-referenced dates and amounts until the picture was so complete and so precise that I could have presented it to a jury. He had been paying for Kylie's rent before she moved into my lake house. He had charged 3 pieces of gold jewelry to a card that technically sat under my company's umbrella. Jewelry I had never seen, had never been gifted, had never held in my hands. He had used my resources to construct a romantic fantasy where he was the generous, powerful man, and I was simply the oblivious machine generating the funds. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday evening. I was reviewing closing documents at my desk when Gavin leaned in the office doorway, jacket already on, and told me a situation had escalated at a leasing in San Marcos. Problem tenant, potential legal issue, and he'd need to drive down Thursday morning and probably stay through the weekend to handle it in person. He seemed genuinely apologetic. He suggested I use the weekend to relax, maybe call my friend Tamara, do something for myself for once. I looked at him for a long moment. Of course, I said. Drive safe. He was gone by 8 Thursday morning, pulling out of our driveway in my white Range Rover with a weekend bag in the back. I watched from the front window until the car disappeared around the corner. Then I walked to my desk, opened the GPS app, and watched the dot head south toward Hill Country. Not toward San Marcos, toward Dripping Springs. I gave it 4 hours, then I called Tamara. I need you to watch Kylie's Instagram, I said, the leasing agent. The moment she posts anything public, a story, a reel, anything, screenshot it and send it directly to me. Tamara is the only person in my life who has never once asked me to explain myself. She said, I'm on it, and hung up. I'd barely gotten through half a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a message from Tamara containing a screenshot and 3 words. Honey, I'm so sorry. Kylie had switched her profile from private to public. Her latest story was filmed from the passenger seat of my Range Rover. My car, the cream interior I'd paid to have custom stitched, my Bottega Veneta sunglasses on her face, that she'd apparently found in the center console. The camera panned to Gavin in the driver's seat, laughing, one hand on the wheel, completely at ease. The text she'd overlaid across the video read, Hill Country weekend with my man. His wife thinks he's working. She's too busy building her little empire to notice. His wife, her little empire. I downloaded the video. I screenshotted every frame. I saved everything to a secure folder in my encrypted cloud drive. Then I sat very still for approximately 90 seconds. I called Roland. My father spent 30 years in oil and gas, before he retired to a ranch outside Weatherford, and if there is a single man on this earth I would call in a crisis, it is him. He answered on the first ring, the way he always does. I said his name, just his name, and he went quiet for a beat and then said, Talk to me, Sloan. I told him in 5 sentences. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He said, I'm in the truck. Where do I meet you? I gave him the plan, and he didn't blink at a single part of it. Gavin's GPS told me they were planning to leave Dripping Springs Sunday afternoon. I knew his habits. He always stopped for gas on I-35 northbound at a Travel America outside New Braunfels. Always, same exit, same pump. Creature of routine, through and through. I calculated drive times and traffic, and I gave Roland the exit number. On Sunday at 2 in the afternoon, I dressed in a white linen blazer and dark trousers. And I drove south in my company truck with Roland, following in his F-250, 2 of his longtime ranch hands riding along, because Roland does not believe in doing anything halfway. I was calm in a way that didn't feel entirely human. The same calm I get right before I sign on a major acquisition, when everything goes quiet and sharp and certain. We parked at the Travel America and waited. At 3:47, the GPS showed the Range Rover pulling into the lot. I stepped out of the truck. Gavin was at the pump, card in hand, when he looked up and saw me walking toward him across the concrete. I watched the blood leave his face in real time. He said my name like a question. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the passenger side and opened the door, and Kylie, who had been mid-sentence on her phone, looked up at me with an expression that moved through surprise, then recognition, then something that tried very hard to look like defiance. She was still wearing my sunglasses. I said, Get out of my car. She said she wasn't going anywhere, and she actually reached for the door handle to pull it shut, which told me everything I would ever need to know about her judgment. I reached across, removed the sunglasses from her face without ceremony, and said it again, quieter this time, because when I get very quiet is when people who know me start paying serious attention. Gavin came around from the pump side. Sloan, can we please be calm about this? Roland stepped out from behind my truck. Gavin stopped talking. Kylie got out of the car. She stood on the concrete in her sandals and her sundress, And the romance left her face so completely, and so fast it was almost clinical to watch. She looked young. She looked like a 24-year-old who had made a catastrophic miscalculation and was only now fully understanding the math. I turned to face the cluster of people who had stopped to stare. Other travelers at the pumps, a family loading up at the adjacent spot, a trucker eating a sandwich on the tailgate of his rig, and I spoke at a volume that carried clearly. I want everyone here to understand what they're looking at, I said. This is my car. This is my credit card that has been paying for their weekend. This is my lake house, where she has been living for the past 2 months. And this, I turned to Gavin directly, is my husband, who has been referring to our life together as an inconvenience he drives away from on Thursday mornings. I held up my phone and showed the screenshot of Kylie's Instagram story to the nearest onlookers. The trucker said something under his breath that carried across the pavement. Gavin tried once more. Please, Sloan, not here. You made your choices in public, I said, on Instagram, with my sunglasses on her face. I climbed into the driver's seat of my Range Rover, adjusted the mirror, and pulled out of the Travel America parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I watched Gavin standing next to the gas pump with Kylie beside him, both of them stranded. No ride, no plan, and by the time I merged onto I-35 heading north, no credit cards that would clear either. I had already sent 2 texts from the lot before I'd even started the engine. One to my financial advisor, one to my assistant, 4 words each: freeze everything and change the locks. By the time I got home, Gavin's Chase debit access, authorized through my personal account, had been deactivated. The corporate Amex was suspended. The lock company arrived 40 minutes after I did. Every exterior lock on our North Dallas home was rekeyed by 9 that evening. The garage codes were changed, and his closet had been packed. Not into luggage, because I chose not to extend him that courtesy, but into contractor bags I hauled to the front step myself. The lake house access codes were wiped remotely from my phone on the drive home. Kylie arrived at the Dripping Springs property late that night and found every door refusing her entry. The private community security escorted her out, and she eventually left. Gavin showed up at our North Dallas house around 11, tried his key, then rang the bell. I watched the Ring camera feed from the bedroom. He rang 4 times. Then he called my cell, and I watched his name illuminate the screen, and I thought about what I wanted to say, and then I pressed decline. He sent 3 texts over the next hour. I read all of them. I responded to none. He slept in his car in a grocery store parking lot because the hotels he tried to book all declined his cards, and he'd left his personal wallet inside the lake house. Kylie had gotten into a friend's apartment across the city, and from what I later heard from our leasing manager, who texted me voluntarily with his apologies, the phone call between them that night was not particularly loving. Both of them received formal termination letters from my HR department Monday morning, citing violation of workplace conduct policy and conflict of interest. 2 weeks later, my attorney filed for divorce, and the prenuptial agreement Gavin had signed, and mostly forgotten about, did precisely what it was designed to do. He left with what he'd brought, which was not much. The lake house, I kept. I drove down alone on a Saturday in October, opened every window, and let the hill country air move through the rooms until the place smelled like cedar and open space again. I had the bedroom repainted, the furniture reconfigured. The comforter Kylie had brought donated to a women's shelter in Austin, along with everything else she'd left behind. I sat on the back porch that evening with a glass of wine and watched the light go gold over the limestone hills, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could name, like the house was fully mine again. About a year later, Tamara mentioned she'd seen Gavin at a strip mall in Arlington. He was working the sales floor at a discount furniture store, the kind with massive clearance banners in the window and a parking lot full of weekend traffic. He looked, she said, like he'd aged a decade. I asked about Kylie. Tamara said the 2 of them had lasted about 3 months before things fell apart, as most things do when the money that funded them disappears. Last anyone heard, Kylie had moved back to her hometown near College Station. Her Instagram was private again. I noted this the same way I note any data point, acknowledged it, filed it, moved on. There is one more thing I will tell you, because it is the part I think about most. 2 years into our marriage, for Gavin's birthday, I gave him a Rolex Daytona. The one he'd admired in a magazine and mentioned twice without realizing he'd mentioned it twice. He wore that watch every single day. He buffed the crystal with his shirt sleeve when he thought no one was watching. He wore it the day he drove my car to Dripping Springs and called it basically his. The certificate of authenticity for that watch is still in my home safe. There is no watch in any catalog that matches it, because the certificate itself is a very convincing forgery. The watch was a master-grade replica I'd sourced through a watchmaker contact in Dallas, who owed me a favor. Indistinguishable to the untrained eye, worth $400. I had never given Gavin anything I couldn't afford to lose, because something in me had done the math early, and wasn't ready to admit what it meant. The real Daytona sits in my safe. I bought it the same week I gave him the replica, because that is the kind of woman I am and have always been. I protect what actually matters. I have worn that watch exactly twice since the divorce. Once to close a deal on a $20 million property in Highland Park. Once on a first date with a structural engineer named Perry who did not know what I was worth and did not ask. Perry is sitting across from me right now, reading on the back porch of the lake house, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, watching the creek move through the property. He is not impressed by things. He is genuinely interested in everything. He laughs at the parts of my stories that are actually funny and gets quiet at the parts that aren't, and he has never once looked at what I built and thought about what it could do for him. I spent 6 years constructing the wrong life. I have spent the last 2 building the right one, and I will tell you that they do not feel like the same world at all. The house, the car, the credit cards. Those came back easily because things always do when you are the one who built them in the first place. What I could not have gotten back, if I'd lost it, was the part of myself that knew, quietly, long before I admitted it out loud, that something was wrong, and kept the real watch locked safely away. That part of me was never touched. That part of me was never even close to theirs to take.